So hello, welcome back to the session. It's now my pleasure, before we start with the panel discussion, it is now my pleasure to introduce Tobias from Varian Medical Systems. It's one of the world-leading companies that provides radiotherapy treatment delivery systems, and they recently launched Ethos Therapy, which is a personalized adaptive treatment planning platform based on AI. As such, they provide an inspiring example of how AI can be translated into clinical applications and clinical practice. Tobias was previously a researcher in medical computer vision and machine learning, and he joined the company as a software engineer in 2015. He now manages an engineering team and is at the forefront of developing AI-driven applications for cancer treatment planning. So Tobias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bastian, for the introduction. I'm just waiting for the slides to come up. Or there they are, a bit small on the screen, but that's okay. So I'll be talking about Ethos Therapy, as Bastian has said, which is basically a complete radiotherapy delivery system, including applications for patient management, treatment planning, and treatment delivery. It includes also the treatment delivery hardware. Not yet available in all markets worldwide, but the user base is growing. And I'm going to present a bit how AI enables adaptive radiotherapy in a standard 15 minutes treatment time slot. Just a brief overview about the agenda, since hopefully not too many of you know exactly what radiotherapy is. I'm going to just give a brief dive in the idea behind it, then present a bit about the challenges for the clinical users, share how our model development process works, and then give a glimpse what we currently know about the actual clinical practice. So radiotherapy is about delivering ionizing radiation to a tumor or clinical target with the goal to kill the cancer cells, whilst engineering the treatment in a way that healthy tissue is spared, right? And the typical process works like that. A CT image is acquired, and on that CT image, a doctor and his team of sometimes physicists and dosimetrists, they contour the target structures that have to be irradiated and contour the organs that have to be spared. Then a treatment plan is created, and that treatment plan is delivered for a couple of fractions, frequently about 30, where every day the patient comes in and the same treatment plan is delivered. But of course, I mean, humans are not static. They change over time. So it might not be ideal that to deliver the same plan every day, and that's where adaptive therapy comes in. So the concept changes there a bit. The role of the doctor also changes a bit. So the doctor is more responsible for making a prescription, or as we call it, intent. I mean, describing in a as precise as possible way how they want the treatment to be conducted or what a successful treatment means. And then every day the patient comes in, three-dimensional computer tomography image is acquired and contoured, and then an adapted treatment plan is created. And there's an interesting paradigm shift. I mean, in order to make that accessible for a wide variety of patients, it's quite impractical that a doctor is at the machine for every given treatment. So actually that entire process is ideally performed by a therapist or a specially trained therapist, right? And now I'm going to just show you how we are doing that in Ethos Radiotherapy. Maybe a bit of a reminder, I mean, from imaging to delivery, the patient is on a treatment couch. Some of them, I mean, they're ill, they are sometimes in pain. Lying still is not comfortable. And with increase of time, the probability actually increases that there are some changes in anatomy while the patient's on the table. For instance, I mean, you can't voluntarily stop your bladder from filling. Breathing is also quite essential, right? So the longer this goes, the more likely it is that the treatment could fail. So time is of the essence. That's why we aim for 15 minutes. And I mean, as I said, the patient's on the table, an image is acquired. And then the first step, I mean, you need to check that image, whether or not it's actually suitable for adaptation. So the critical anatomy has to be very well visible on that image. And that's the first gate, as we call it. Then we use CNNs, actually, AI models, to segment critical organs at risk that we call influences, because they're typically close to the target and they influence the shape and the position of the targets and subsequently how the treatment beams have to be arranged. Also, the organs are typically quite well visible on the CBCT images. So it is actually possible, or we have to make sure that it is possible for the trained therapist to review and correct these structures if needed. After these structures are approved, we can actually use the information from these reviewed and corrected contours to accurately place the target structures, which have to be reviewed again. And then we can create the treatment plan and deliver the treatment. So you see here, I mean, just going to the clinical user and having the therapist in mind in order to be able to do this kind of really complex things efficiently and safely. We segmented the workflow into very disjunct steps. There's no going back and forth, it's forward only. Of course, you can stop every time so that the user can really concentrate on a specific task at a given time very clearly. Another crucial aspect, obviously, I mean, in order to cut down the time, the quality of the segmentation has to be good so that the correction effort isn't too large. And every computation that is in between those steps have to be fast. And that's really, CNNs do fit the bill. And I'm going to show you how we develop these models for that specific segmentation task. Overall, I mean, we follow a relatively standard process we have to acquire and curate data, then we train models, and we first have an in-house verification process where we have some quantitative measures that tell us whether or not a model is worth to pursue further. And then, as we've often heard today, a very critical step is we have to validate with clinical experts that these models fulfill the user need before we put the models into production. And at any point in time, if we do observe any issues, then we have to go back to the scratch board and retrain models with new data, with new parameters, whatever fits the bill. Going into a bit more depth, what we do is we typically train models specifically for target anatomical sites, for instance, an intact male pelvis, where the prostate is still there. For situations without prostate, we have a prostatectomy, we have a different model. And then for each of these sites, we do data acquisition. And here, a big challenge is, I mean, we want to market and see ethos being used worldwide. So the data has to have the right level of variability in terms of anatomical variabilities over geographies, clinical or diseases, clinical conditions like whether or not markers are implanted or catheters are present and all that. And if we're sure we have this variability, then we actually, I mean, we commission contours according to standard protocols ourselves, so that the contours that we using for training are actually on a similar level of quality. Then obviously we need to split into training and test set, and two important things here. We need to be really careful that the data is split on a patient level so that we don't accidentally overfit by having patients that we have seen during training, that we use them for testing. And we really need to make sure that our test data is accurate. So each test image and contours are reviewed by a physician actually before we use it for any kind of verification. Then a bit on the technical side, I mean, we are using encoder-decoder networks based in architecture on the favorite and famous UNets and DenseNets. We have specifically tuned these architectures so that the accuracy or the quality of these networks is good enough for very complex organs. For instance, the bowel loops are something really challenging if you ever try that. And also to facilitate training on large databases for multi-class models. A brief glimpse in our verification. We do use standard quantitative measures of segmentation quality, depending a bit on how compact the organs are, DICE is efficient, or we use contour distance. And then we really look at if a model is kind of improving or has a good quality over a wide variety of test cases. So here a comparison of 4 models, and one is significantly outperforming the others, at least on one case. Which is actually anatomically extremely challenging one, because that particular bladder shape, I think it is, does not occur in the training set. When we go to validation or validating the user needs, we actually ask clinicians to review an automatic segmentation on the subjective review and correction effort. And we do accept or rate segmentations as acceptable if they only require minor or no corrections. And then just also a look here at an example. We compare here one of our model that segments male anatomy against segmentations in clinical practice. The model is in blue and the clinical practice segmentations are yellow. And on individual structures, we get more than 90% acceptance. And on the entire structure set, we get a bit more than 80%, which is actually our goal for production. And that is quite similar to how the segmentation of clinical practice are actually rated. Right, and then a bit of look on how it looks in the field. I mean, ETHOS has entered the market in September 2019. We are quite happy about the adaptation. There, more than 4,500 adaptive treatment sessions have been treated so far. And on some sites, the especially trained therapists can actually conduct the workflow. On other sites, it's still a physician has to be at the console of physicists to kind of do the final approvals. We are continuously monitoring the model performance so that we know where and what to improve. And one measure of that I'm going to show you now is a bit the timing. How long does it take people to actually review and correct these segmentations? You see it here I can't actually read it anymore because it's so tiny. If I recall right, it's rectum and bladder area. It's male for sure. And it's between 4 and 10 minutes. And if you look at the full picture, actually, I mean, this is the entire workflow, individual steps here, and then the complete workflow in yellow. The average is actually below 15 minutes for an adaptive session. So that's it from my end for a bit of a success story from clinical transfer of machine learning research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really an awesome talk, and I look forward to digging a little bit into this in the panel discussion. I'm sure that you have some things to tell us about this great work. Now let's move on in the interest of time to Assaf Gottlieb, who is a assistant professor at the University of Texas Center for Precision Health, arriving from IBM research in Haifa, prior to which he was a postdoctoral fellow at both Stanford University and Tel Aviv University. So Assaf has degrees in physics and computer science, and he has also worked in software and algorithm development. He is interested in understanding and modeling drugs and their mode of action, as well as their relation to drug efficacy, adverse reaction, and pharmacogenomics, focusing primarily on chronic conditions. And in addition, his research leverages electronic health records for the hypothesis generation and validation of therapeutic outcomes. Assaf, thank you very much for coming here, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you. Should I be seeing? Okay. So should I be flipping between the next and to see what I'm showing? I'll try that. Okay, so quick question. So this is going to be very fast. So keep on your toes because I'm going to try to get 5 different barriers that I encountered within my research in 10 minutes. So first of all, you already said, who am I? I'll just say that I was kind of going up in complexity as I went along. I was also going from more bench work, kind of bioinformatics, biology, towards the clinical, which is mostly what I'm doing today. So this is kind of my path. I'll spend 1 minute to tell you my vision. I'm doing a lot of things beside this vision, but I always like to keep this vision in my mind as I drive towards precision medicine, is that of a data-driven similarity-based framework that integrates multidimensional patient data for selecting the best treatment. And the questions that I'm mostly interested in is how to integrate different health factors. There are many health factors, they're partially known, and currently I'm dealing mostly with clinical and genetics. I haven't done environmental yet, but maybe in the future. And I'll show you in this slide a little bit of what I mean. So this is a similarity-based framework that I designed during my postdoc. This is for patients, but it can be also for drugs. I'll show you examples. The basic idea is something that many people think about in precision medicine is that you have, let's say, a new patient, and you want to predict something about the patient, whether it's diagnosis or prognosis or which treatments will work the best. And what you do is you compare your new patient to patients that already were treated, hospitalized, and you know what happened to them. Use a framework of integrating multiple types of similarity based on past diagnosis, based on blood tests, etc. And you assign or predict the best treatment or best diagnosis for that patient. And indeed, we tried. We first tried the best diagnosis for a patient upon admission to a hospital. So 5 lessons in less than 10 minutes. Lesson number 1. So indeed, we tried to do this analysis of whether we can predict. We actually got pretty good results, better than we anticipated. And my first lesson was in Stanford when after my talk, one of the physicians, who's also an informatician, approached me and said, you know, this is a really good framework, but you're not addressing the right question. Ask why. And he said, well, physicians typically know how to diagnose patients. They don't know what to give them, what treatment will be the best one. They have protocols, but in many cases, they don't know which protocol will be the best for this specific patient. So my first lesson is, when you try to do a framework, make sure you're addressing a real need. He was right at the end. CDSSs, clinical decision support systems, are not that successful yet. And there have been 40 years of clinical decision support systems. Lesson number 2 for the same framework. So we use the framework to predict various traits about drugs. And one that we thought had a very good clinical implications was predicting drug indications, which is drug repurposing or repositioning, finding new indications for known drugs, for approved drugs. And the lesson I learned here is that I presented this to the CTO of one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And after the talk, he said, this is, again, a really nice computational framework. I'm very impressed by that. I don't see how I can use that. And the irony here is that the same company 4 years later came to us in IBM Research when I moved to IBM Research and asked whether we can help them and have a computational method to find drug repositioning. So the second lesson is, even if the need is real, timing is critical. The market needs to be at the same place where the research is. And I think now it is. Third lesson. This is a lesson mostly not from work that I've actually done. It's more of a work that I proposed for funding and got rejected, not approved for funding. And this is for applying EHR risk prediction. We tried that for cardiovascular, for myocardial infarction. We tried that for HIV risk calculation to determine who goes to do a HIV test. And what we found is, even if the need is real, and physicians currently use calculators for cardiovascular risk, for myocardial infarction, you still need to show benefit to convince them that what you suggest will improve what they currently have, the protocols that they currently have, either an improved cardiovascular calculator or an HIV risk calculator, which currently there is none. The CDC says only test everybody, even an 80-year-old person for HIV, which is less likely. So we didn't manage to convince reviewers that this is needed over what exists in the field right now. So lesson 2, you need to show benefit, and it's really hard if you're asking for funding. Lesson 4 out of 5. This is a work that I've done in IBM research, and I was very enthusiastic about doing clinical causal inference from electronic health records, which is something that I learned while I was in IBM, and how do you correct for the tons of biases that exist in the data and confounding, etc. And what I found through the review process is that causal inference is excellent if you want to emulate clinical trials, randomized clinical trials, is excellent, but it's still challenging, and people will believe you only if you support things that they already know. It's very hard to come up with something that is surprising, and they'll say, I don't really believe that system, we need a randomized clinical trial. So the 4th lesson is if you apply causal inference, you still need probably randomized clinical trial to validate your findings. And the last one is translating cancer prediction, cancer drug prediction. This is a very recent work, just got published 2 months ago. And what we found, and we're still finding, this is a work in progress, is that while we produced a really nice, you can see it's a deep learning machine learning network, integrating very different types of data, chemoinformatic, genetic information, gene expression, etc. And we got really awesome results on in vitro IC50 when we are working with the researchers on actual patients, and it's not straightforward. Different outcomes, different ways to, the gene expression, the information is different, so it's very challenging. I'm willing to address that more in the panel if needed. So that's it for me. 5 different lessons in 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was really a nice roundhouse tour over the field, and it's very nice to succinctly summarize what people have learned in their careers so far and give a leg up to the newcomers. So we'll circle back to a few of these things, but before that, I want to officially start the panel discussion now. So my name is Bastian. I'm a senior assistant in the machine learning and computational biology lab, which is hosting this event together with AMLD, or rather we are co-organizing it in that sense. I'm based at ETH Zurich, and I'm joined with some of our speakers today, namely Julia Vogt, who is an assistant professor in computer science at ETH Zurich, leading the medical data science group, Steve Jiang, who is an assistant professor at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center, Danielle Belgrave, who is a principal research manager at Microsoft Research in Cambridge, as well as Assaf Gottlieb from the University of Texas Center for Precision Health, and Tobias from Varian Medical Systems, where he is a software engineering manager. So I hope I got all of that right, and it's truly my pleasure to welcome all of you here. Thank you very, very much for taking time out of your abundantly busy schedules, I must imagine. And thank you in particular for doing this during an ongoing health crisis, making this a somewhat ironic but also very timely event, I think, to have to discuss what AI can maybe do in clinical machine learning. Thank you very much for that. So to start off the round a little bit, let's start with a very, very simple question that you've probably heard a lot of times now. But I think our listeners and viewers would be really interested in that. Namely, in Tobias's and Assaf's talks, we heard a lot about success stories. And my question would now be, and starting with Julia maybe, Do you have also a success story of a clinical application of an ML project, or rather, do you have a story where you encountered certain challenges towards bringing these sort of things to a success?
Sure. First, thanks for inviting me here. So it kind of depends what you count as a success story for translating ML into the clinic, right? So of course, we have many successful projects that ended up in a research paper and then there it stopped. And we have a few projects where we were successful to develop a tool, develop an app that can be used in the clinic. And this is what I count as truly successful. So I will give one of these examples here. And this is also the same example I gave in the talk this morning for those of you who heard the talk. So this is, we developed an app that can predict very early the risk of newborn babies to develop severe jaundice. And this is important because the kids and the mothers are sent home earlier and earlier from the hospital, sometimes on the same day of giving birth. And with this tool, we would like to avoid that the child is sent home, and then at home it develops this disease and it develops severe consequences. So we developed a tool where we have a web application that clinicians can use in the clinic, and it's fast, it's easy to use. So the clinicians only need to type in 4 variables, which is important because time is crucial in these settings. Usually you have a time pressure, so we cannot ask physicians to type in hundreds of variables in small boxes. And then they predict, they click a button and they get a probability that this specific child is at risk of developing the disease. So they get like a risk score for every child. So it's also truly personalized. And this is one of the stories where we ended up to translate the models to the clinic. And I also have to say, so far, it is still a research prototype. So it's not a certified decision support tool yet. So this is a complete different story, which is highly challenging. But for me, it's already a success to have these research prototypes that can be used. And now we are even going further to certify this and test this in all different settings and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, I fully agree with you. Thanks for providing also this definition of a success story, because that is indeed an interesting success story that goes a little bit beyond measuring the output in terms of a research paper. Although, of course, a research paper is truly a success in itself, but it's a different kind of success. So thank you for that. Steve, do you have anything to add from your experience there? So any success stories of a clinical application of a machine learning project that you want to share with us?
We do have a few examples there. I agree with Julia that there are a lot of AI research out there, right? Successful in terms of the publications and presentations. And you heard, from time to time, this AI model beats experienced physicians in terms of the performance, that kind of stuff, right? But you don't see many clinical usage of those models because there's still a gap between research and the clinical implementation. It's not trivial. It's very difficult, in my opinion. So I've been, working in the clinical field as a medical physicist for many years. So I understand actually the technical word and the clinical word are two different words. They approach problems, they think about problems, they actually even use different languages. It's very difficult to understand each other. So actually, Assaf had a very good summarization of some of the challenges, right? So I think in order to have the AI models, algorithms being used clinically, you need to really have a very good collaboration. It's more than just meeting once in a while, like 1 hour conversation. That's not enough. You need perhaps to develop some sort of partnership. You need to have weekly meetings. You need to have clinicians and developers, researchers really working in an integrated team together. So we've been doing that because, like I said, we are working in an academic medical center. So we do have this kind of advantages working with clinicians, clinical staff on a daily basis. So we've been bringing some of our work in the clinical practice and used, by physicians and other clinical staff. But we receive feedbacks on a daily basis and improve the model, improve the user interface. You need this kind of interactions, in my opinion, in order to have a successful implementation of your work.
Great, and I'm imagining you also need to learn to speak their language in some sense, but we'll probably circle back to that later. So Danielle, do you have anything to share with us from your experience? I must imagine that given your position in an industry research lab, also that you might have an even more different take on this than people like me, for example, who come from a more or less just academic background. So I'm really interested in what you have to say.
So actually, I'm sorry to disappoint. So the one example that I was going to think of is actually quite a humble example. And I'm not sure if we can really attribute the success to machine learning, but I think the success is due to really good clinical diagnostic tools. So I think my biggest success story in the application of machine learning for healthcare is in helping collaborate with creating a diagnostic for peanut allergy. And this was a huge problem because prior to this, the way to diagnose peanut allergy is giving someone who's allergic to peanuts. And obviously, if you're allergic to peanuts and you take peanuts, that's the only way of validating peanut allergy. It's not safe. So we did a study based on different components of peanut allergy, and we were able to identify through blood tests something that gave almost 100% accuracy. So you don't have to eat peanuts to validate if you're allergic to peanuts. So I think this is a huge success story. And this was basically using ROC curves. So we did some dimensionality reduction techniques, but the simplest thing was actually had the highest diagnostic value. And this is actually used in clinical practice now.
That's an excellent success story, I have to say. Primarily because of the elegance of simplicity. I mean, I'm in a previous life I used to be a mathematician, so I very much appreciate when these rules and things are elegant and simple and don't require having separate computing centers for solving it. So thank you very much. That's an awesome story. I'll circle back to some of those aspects. I'm taking copious notes here. So anything else you wanted to add to this, Assaf? I mean, you gave us a great overview of certain things to avoid. So,
yes. So as I move from computer science to working more with clinicians, I fully agree with what Julia said about what I consider success. So I consider success as something that manages to get to the clinic. To even helping one patient will be a success for me. And I don't, as you saw, I cannot claim any of my work has managed to reach that. I am working with clinicians right now to reach that, but it's not ripe yet. I would say something, I would mention something that I was involved. I mentioned my framework and the patient similarity-based work that has inconsequently led to a formation of a company called MedAware that I was involved in the first founding half a year of its founding. It's still there 9 years later. It's catching medical errors in prescriptions. And I think the fact that they're a startup and they still are here 9 years later, I think that's kind of a success. I'm not taking the credit for myself. I just helped at the beginning, but kudos for them. It's my co-authors, and I know they are implemented in few hospitals in the US. So I needed the industry to take the project and move it to a success. I couldn't do it myself.
Well, I mean, it's a collaborative effort, right? So
yes, but I'm not involved. After half a year, I decided I continue in the academia, and they moved to the industry. So
that's also very, very interesting take. Thank you very much for this. So, Tobias, do you want to share something else with us from the world of Varian or from your own career prior to that, maybe? Because I think, unless I'm misremembering, you also were part of ETH Zurich during your education, right?
So. Yeah, that's correct. I have a background in medical image analysis, but I want to circle back to what Steve had. I mean, it's maybe not a not a new thing, but it's, in my mind, one of the most important things. I mean, AI or machine learning, it creates opportunities, right? I mean, you have a new method and you have a new problem, a new data set, and then from there, you really need to involve more people, right? And we heard this morning from Stephanie, I think, about the context. And I think that is exactly where kind of clinical collaborations or collaborations in any kind help define that context. In which context is machine learning as a tool really useful in order to create a use case that brings value to the clinic, which in my mind is the ultimate success. I mean, really making it available to make clinical personnel's lives easier and improving the outcomes for patients. So we have been working since, I don't know, more than 5 years with clinical partners and research institutions in order to get to the stage we are now. And that was really instrumental. We continue to do so. I mean, even at this stage, I think these collaborations are still very, very valuable. We do have a consortium actually of bigger research institutions and hospitals worldwide that help us evaluate what are improvements to our current solutions and how do we enable this kind of approaches to reach more patients and improve outcomes for their diseases.
That's a good perspective. So I just got an audience question for you, by the way, namely, how do you measure the success of your product, or rather, how successful is the product or services that you're offering in practice?
Well, the ultimate success, I think, is still going to be seen, right? There are now clinical studies starting using ethos in the field, and I hope that in a few years we can really see improved outcomes and survivability for the patients. But that's going to take a while. And for me, in the meantime, measure of success is, as I presented, is kind of the uptake of the clinical market of this kind of solutions, because that, in my mind, I mean, clinicians are smart, right? They want to bring solutions to their patients that improve outcomes, even if it's not yet fully proven, right, clinically. So the more there's an uptake, the more trust people have in our system, and that already satisfies me quite a lot. So maybe one thing I might add, what I said before, in this, so far there have been 4,500, more than that, adaptive sessions treated worldwide. And actually, I mean, the clinicians still have a choice. I mean, you need to be better safe than sorry, so they can still kind of choose whether they want to deliver the newly adapted plan or whether they want to kind of deliver the original plan that the physicians and physicists have originally created. And in more than 85% of the treatment cases, the adaptive plan is actually treated because based on their current understanding, the clinicians thinks that this will improve the outcomes for their patient. And that is, for me, quite a big success. Thank you.
No, definitely, fully agree. Thank you for clarifying this, or thank you for giving us an inside perspective into this. So I want to circle back a little bit to what Danielle said, because I found this really, really interesting. So you said that you have a humble success story to share that uses that barely makes use of machine learning, although I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. So that is of course interesting, right? Because so what would you recommend to focus on if you would now have the money to sponsor, let's say, a billboard in front of the next NeurIPS conference, if they ever become physical again, and you could put one message there to tell aspiring AI researchers and AI for healthcare researchers what to focus on if they're just starting out, what would that be? Would you suggest picking the big problems first, or, well, I should say the big problems is of course a little bit your definition, or maybe figure out something that has also a very, very big impact for the right set of people, such as this peanut allergy. I mean, I myself am allergic not against peanuts but against many things, and so I'm happy that this improves a little bit the diagnostic, and it's just not trying to use me as a guinea pig, as it were. So what would you suggest there? Let's maybe start again with Julia first, if that's all right with you, Julia.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's kind of difficult to say I would recommend this to everyone, right? It always depends on, of course, which what you're interested in. So what I realized is that our tools and methods will only be used by physicians if they trust our models. if we can explain what we do. And so this is what I think is important, that we are able to develop trustworthy methods, interpretable methods, explainable methods that are either intrinsically interpretable or that can be explained post-hoc, so that we can explain which features lead to this prediction. For example, if we have images, which features will lead to this prediction, or if we can explain the model itself. I just realized that if we have black box models, physicians are really hesitant. They don't trust this. They think it's kind of magic, and they don't want to put magic on patients. So they really want to know what's going on. And otherwise, I think it's just difficult to convince them to use it if you cannot explain what's going on. So this is, I think, what's at least important for me in the next 3 years, but I guess there are a lot of different directions you can take in this aspect.
But so to paraphrase, you would have a billboard that says focus on interpretability.
Yeah,
if you want
or
to bring
trustworthy
it
methods.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a nice thing. I mean, I can definitely see that this has relevance. So explaining how you come to a prediction. I mean, this is a crucial step if we want to trust AI systems in particular, of course, in healthcare. So the question is, of course, always, would you like to be treated with one of the algorithms that you develop yourself? So that can also be used as a test, maybe. So Steve, what would your recommendation be, or what would you say if you had to focus on a few sentences to give to people starting out now doing this? What should they focus on, or what should they not neglect? Let's call it that.
I actually think there are two types of important research, AI research in medicine. One is to find out the most important application, meaning to find out the most important clinical problems, right, to solve. Mm-hmm. So you need to work with clinicians very closely to understand their problems, understand their terminology, understand everything they do there. So that is important, right? Second one is to find out some more important methodology type of research when you use AI in medicine, which is quite different from the general AI research, in our opinion, right? So that's another type of research I think people can really focus on, in our opinion. So I don't know how to summarize in one sentence.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, that's also a very, very nice perspective. So what about you, Danielle? What would you recommend people should do, or start as newbies should do?
Yeah, so I think there are two aspects of machine learning for healthcare that go hand in hand. I know we're focusing on thinking about utility and models that are useful as well, but I think it's really important as well along the axes as well to think of machine learning for healthcare as part of the process of scientific discovery. And I think that's, Julia has alluded to that in her the first response as well, that a lot of what we do is actually pushing the field of science in general in order to discover things. And this is really important to do as well and to invest in. And maybe sometimes we're very quick to think, what are the useful scenarios, which is really important because we do want to have immediate impact. But sometimes maybe it's a bit like wanting to pick the fruit from the tree, the low-hanging fruits from the tree, without actually nurturing the roots. And I see this more exploratory aspects of machine learning for healthcare as nurturing the roots of science as well, and doing that deep exploration to understand mechanisms so that we can have impact in terms of utility.
Okay, all right. So that's a fascinating perspective. So you would suggest to people and remind them that it's fundamentally also about science and about pushing the frontiers of knowledge. That's a very nice perspective. I appreciate that a lot. So Assaf, do you what are your thoughts on this? What would you recommend people should do? I mean, you had some very nice rules about this.
Yeah, so I just repeat. I think that about that as a stepwise process. You first need to find a real need. That's going back to what Steve said, and you should work with clinicians to do that. If you are a computer scientist and you work in AI. And after that, you need to find out how you can both show improvement, how you can show clear clinical utility, because even if your algorithm is perfect AUC off the roof, it might not be clinically useful. It might be that whatever you predict, the clinician will still have the same choices, make the same choices regardless of what you predicted. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree again with Julia. I'm working with a clinician now, and we have an excellent predictor for some kind of procedure, which has some risks. And after that, he asked us if we could play the model so he can understand or make a simpler model than the one that actually worked best. So you need to get to the clinicians by interpretation. So those are my stepwise, I think, implementation, education, etc., training. All those will come afterward. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's that I can imagine very well. Thank you for that. So Tobias, do you want to add anything to this? What would your recommendations?
Just incrementally, I liked a lot what Danielle said, right? I mean, in my mind, science is broad, and my recommendation is research what you're excited about, right? There will be some people who are more excited about something that is really relevant for clinicians, some people that will be more excited about mathematics, statistics, I don't know, you name it. And I think all of them, all of these things are pretty important. I mean, if every researcher out there would try kind of to bug clinicians to find an application for the AI model, then the clinicians wouldn't be doing any clinical work anymore, right? So yeah. I really think there is a broad variety of valuable ways to do AI research out there. And for me, being excited about it is the most important thing.
That's a nice perspective. So thank you for that. So maybe now now a little bit of another question in the form of how would you convince clinicians to use these things? Because I mean there might be some reservations, right? So maybe not with all of them, of course, in all the fields, but in general there's also a little bit of a reluctance towards using AI. There are some certain obstacles that need to be overcome. The ethical things would be a very, very big step. The biases in the data, that is something that is very hard to cover and might need for this we would need another conference maybe to fully address this, at least to some extent, right? But so what are the primary obstacles maybe that you encountered in talking to clinicians, and what would you how would you open up a collaboration with them? Maybe starting again with Julia.
Okay, so well, I think it's very important to have a clinician you work with where you talk to and you trust, and both of you have the same aim of reaching this research goal. So I think it starts with one collaboration where you're really passionate about, both parties. Mm-hmm. And then if you develop something that works, that has impact, then you can go on and try to distribute it and to convince other physicians to use it as well. And of course, for other physicians that don't know you and don't trust you, to convince them to use it, it needs some justification, right? I mean, I guess in the ideal case, you get some certification, which is, of course, a very long and difficult process, especially for AI tools. And it also needs a nice interface that physicians can use, that they can use in their daily practice. It needs to be fast, it needs to be visual, they need to understand what they are doing. It cannot take a lot of time. It needs validation on different cohorts, so that you can, of course, you cannot use a model we train in Switzerland and just use it in Asia or in the US. So it needs clinical trials. So I guess for these models that are used locally to really distribute them globally, these are all steps that need to be taken, and it is a very long process.
I can imagine that. I mean, it's a long road ahead towards any application, right? So, Steve, what do you think? What are the big obstacles here? How to convince people?
I guess first step we need to convince the clinicians that this model is useful, right? Can improve the patient outcome, can improve the efficiency. It has to demonstrate that in a very solid way, ideally through clinical trials, right? convince them. Number one. Number two, it has to be very easy to use. It has to be very user-friendly. So clinicians will like to use it. They want to use it, right? So that means user interface, also explainability, interpretability, and also you put yourself in a position like assistant instead of, hey, telling physicians, you should do this, you should do that. No, they are the ones making the final decisions. They are responsible for their patients. You just provide your opinions, suggestions, make their work better, faster, safer, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you need to have all these considerations there.
Thank you for that. That's a good thought about this. So what do you think, Danielle? What are some obstacles that you encountered?
So I have some background noise, so I may need to mute just now. But okay. I think that it depends on the clinicians. So some clinicians, it depends on the clinicians and the type of data they have. So some clinicians want to uptake these models more readily, and some don't. So, sorry, can you hear the background noise? Or is it just me?
A little bit. We can also skip you for now and then circle back to you later if that's.
Okay, I think it's stopped. But okay. I think the one thing that I would highlight is with where there's poor uptake from clinicians is understanding the workflow of clinicians. So this is an easy way to help with machine learning. So by understanding the workflow, you can understand where are the places where machine learning can help in the workflow of clinicians, because what we want is true AI human collaboration. And I think that this is a really good low-hanging fruit. By understanding those workflows, we can see, well, where are the questions where machine learning can answer and can help the workflow of clinicians.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's certainly true. So Assaf, what do you think about this? What obstacles did you find particularly interesting?
So I'm coming from the School of Biomedical Informatics, and what I found is different in biomedical informaticians versus computer scientists is that they need to understand the clinicians. I think both sides, in one sentence, interdisciplinary education of both sides, the clinicians and the informaticians, to both understand the capabilities of any AI system and the limitations. I think once that's in place, I think both of them can move forward in a collaborative way.
Okay, yeah, this is very well thought out. I mean, understanding the system is of course a prerequisite, right, for also bringing it into the practice at some point. So Tobias, what do you think about this? What are some obstacles, or what are the primary obstacles that you encountered so far?
Some and primary. So I'm the last always, so I can only increment or repeat. What I think is most important, is a clear dedication to understanding the clinical need, right? That starts by finding out who actually in the world or wherever has a need for solutions like the ones you're kind of researching on. And then in the conversation, also always trying to understand what is actually their problem and how can I make their lives better, right? And that I think is the most critical aspect to transferring research into applications. Just something quite minor. I mean, me also I'm a computer scientist background, and I always, for me, thinking in 3D and in shapes and volumes is always quite natural. And I'm always puzzled by the slice-based thinking about medical images that clinicians have, right? And so being aware of one's own biases and that they might not be the same for everyone else is something really, really critical also in these clinical collaborations.
Mm-hmm. I mean, fully agree with this. I mean, this nicely accentuates what Steve said earlier in, I think, his very first question, or rather his very first answer, namely talking the right language of the collaborators, right? Understanding where they're coming from, where they're at, what they understand by something. That's a good point. So now you're right. I always ask you last about these things. So now let's maybe flip it around to slowly wrap up the panel. We still have some time, so there's no rush. But still, as maybe a last question and maybe a very broad one. So, what problem would you ideally like to have solved at the end of your career, or maybe within a horizon of, let's say, 5 years or 10 years, something like that. So is there one favorite thing where you would say, okay, this, I want to have this solved either by yourself, by collaborators, through collaborators? It doesn't have to be all your own work and getting Nobel Prizes for that left and right, but just something where you said, okay, no, this is something that I want to address to some extent in your career.
Yeah, let me scale down the question a bit, because
Yes,
it's
certainly. Certainly.
That's really, I don't know what I want to solve, that world hunger, right, or cancer in general. But quite specifically, one thing where I feel big improvements can be made is, as we've heard from Daniel Rieck today, is medical imaging. So applying AI to do more efficient, faster, better reconstruction. I mean, this has so many applications, because imaging time is quite a limiting factor in many clinical applications. For instance, if patient moves or breathes while you image, you always get artifacts of some sort. So really speeding up that process, I think it will open up the doors for many, many very fascinating and interesting things down the line, because this is really at the beginning of many of the medical imaging pipelines. So that's one thing I would like to see improvements in. Thank you.
That's a good answer. And it's also perfectly fine, by the way, of course, to downscale this question. I formulated broad specifically to challenge all of us and all of you, primarily to think a little bit about what the field might be, or what the big questions or the small questions should be for us. So Assaf, what do you think there? What would you like ideally to be solved?
Well, I think I agree with Tobias that I think imaging is the most, although I'm not working in that field, imaging is mostly the most ripe now to be handled by AI. I would like to see precision medicine in terms of pharmacogenomics solved, and it's a real tricky, because cost, a lot of different things that are not research come into place, whether people will just sequence their data, their genome, privacy issues, all the ethical issues needs to be solved. I think once they're solved, better treatments will be available to people, better drugs, better dosage, especially in cancer, I think.
That's a good hope. That's a good goal to work towards. Yeah. So what do you think, Danielle?
So I think slightly echoing what Assaf has said, I think personalization is a big one. And this is what I'd love to see solved. Whether we can develop generalizable frameworks for personalization, I think that's a big one.
Yeah, that's of course that's a really nice hope and a really big goal to work towards, to really open the doors for truly personalized applications of medical technology to patients. Thank you. So how about you, Steve? What are your thoughts? What do you think? What would you like to solve or see solved within the career?
So I'm interested in AI and clinician integrated systems, right? We call it ACIS, AI, CIS. So I'm working on that, and I hope more and more people, working towards that, have AI and clinicians and clinical staff, clinical systems really integrated. So I hope at the end of my career, I will see more intelligent radiotherapy departments, radiotherapy systems, with AI being there everywhere, right? Helping people doing their job better, faster, and like I said, safer, cheaper. So that'll be great. That's what I want to see.
Thank you for that. That's also a very nice, succinct answer. And how about you, Julia? What would you like to be solved? What would you like to see to be solved?
Well, I mean, in general, I would like to reduce the gap between machine learning and medicine, so close this gap between these two disciplines, to bring the machine learning methods that really work great to the patient as much as possible. And I mean, in all application areas, of course, but where I see a big potential is also in imaging, or in multimodal learning, where you have different modalities like images, text, or even videos, and then combine learning over all these data to improve also personalized medicine using all the information you have about a patient and leverage this information to come to a personalized conclusion for a patient, and ideally even implement this into a tool that will be used in the clinic. So this is something I think would be great in the next 5 to 10 years.
Nice. So that would be the holistic view of a patient through the lens of machine learning and or AI. That's really nice. Thank you very much for that. So now maybe as the last question before we close, and this can be a short answer now. So let's scale the time frame now down to the smallest one that you can think about, namely, what in your opinion, of all the approaches that we've seen today, or of all the approaches that you are familiar with in your work, what would you say, or what do you think has the highest potential for being available in the near future? So what do you think will probably work more sooner than later in this area? Maybe let's maybe start with Julia again, if it's all right with you, or you still need some time to think.
Sure. I mean, this is a tricky one. I mean, I don't think I can look into the future and say this method will probably work best. So I think to reach the aim of bridging the gap between these two disciplines, what really is crucial are interdisciplinary collaborations. So this is the first step. And from a methods point of view, I think it depends a lot in which area you're working. Are you working in the imaging area? Then it's maybe more neural networks. Are you working on the small data size regime? Then it's maybe still more on the more statistical based methods. So I don't think I would like to fix it to one method that works best, but more like start with the interdisciplinary collaborations, talk to each other, find the common language. I think this is most crucial to start, and then find the method that works best for the specific problem you're looking at. Sorry, I should keep it short, right? So
it's all right. Thank you for this. So Steve, what do you think? What of all the approaches that we've seen, or all the problems that we are trying to address in this area, what has the biggest potential for you to be actually realized within a very short time frame now?
So I would say image segmentation, because that has been in low-hanging fruit when people use AI to solve medical problems. And there are a lot of research there. And also, there are a lot of commercial products, even including the ones from Varian, right? So it's kind of a partially solved problem already. And there are some remaining challenges, but I believe in the coming few years, those will be overcome, and then it becomes routine clinical software tool, image segmentation.
That would be really neat to have. I fully agree. So Danielle, what do you think?
So I agree with what Julia said, that I think with machine learning for healthcare, you need to be a generalist. So you have many different tools in a toolbox, and you shouldn't limit yourself to one method. That said, I do see a big potential with deep learning, especially in the era of a lot of data, big data. There are a lot of promises in what deep learning can do for the field.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, this is definitely one of the things to look out for, one of the trends that has been ongoing for a while now. So, Assaf, what do you think about this?
Well, I concur about the imaging. I already said that. I think it's right. But I think it's going to take a little bit more time. The construction of large consortia of EHR to solve the fragmentation of EHRs, that will enable more research that is done on EHRs.
I see. So having joining forces to address these problems, right?
Yes, there are works in that are currently in the US. There's a lot because the US health system is very fragmented. I'm part of something that is in the works, European and US initiative. It's working very hard. That's why I didn't see it in the next year, but maybe in 5 years it will be there.
Yep, that would be nice. Thank you very much. I mean, I should also say, I mean, this is recorded, but obviously no one will hold it against you if the predictions don't make it. I mean, it is the future we're talking about, and it's tough to predict. Who could have predicted that we would all be sitting at home now, essentially? So anyway, let's move on to our last speaker maybe for this, Tobias. What do you think? What can we expect to be solved, or what should we expect to be solved soon?
You said we're talking about the future, but just what Steve said about image segmentation, it's already reality now, right? I mean, you've seen in my presentation, and there are other applications for AI-based image segmentation out there. So it is in clinical practice. I do hope that the adaptation increases, and there's probably going to be more fields where this is clinically useful in the near future. And the next thing, I mean, I already said it, in image reconstruction, I do have the thing that we're on the cusp there of making it clinically useful.
All right, that's a very nice capstone for this. So I think we are a little bit over the allotted time anyway, so I guess I would now be closing this panel discussion. And I really want to thank you again for appearing here, for talking to us, for bearing with us and answering the questions from myself, from my colleagues, from the audience. Thank you also very much for your talks and for preparing everything in advance, in particular for the ones of you who pre-recorded them. I mean, this goes out to all the speakers, obviously, but I know that pre-recording makes it even harder because you're essentially talking into a void and you have no audience feedback whatsoever. So thank you very much for all of you. Thank you for your participation.